It was incredible to be there. It was really eye-opening in terms of, I guess, how differently people think about marketing and tech in that part of the world, particularly like India, China, and then Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia as well.
And like, what do you think are the main differences? Because I have this theory that in Australia we're kind of over-managed as companies and over-marketed, comparatively to the size of our markets. And there's this sort of raw volumes that come into play that unless you've worked in the US and stuff, you'd be exposed to them. Like, well, you actually don't need to be that good at your job because it's just like raw, more N of everything. And I think, sometimes we get too caught up in using too much. What's the big difference?
So in that part of the world, particularly in India and some parts of Southeast Asia, there's a really big difference in terms of how marketing is done, particularly around mobile and also platforms. So to give you one snapshot, in India, Flipkart is the dominant platform for e-commerce. It's like the Amazon of e-commerce. Yep. A number of years ago, the Indian government actually kicked out Alibaba, the Chinese equivalent of Amazon, out of the country, and then Flipkart has become the platform, where ecosystem in which so many apps and Martech companies are built on top of. Because in the Indian culture, dealing with a single platform is really, really important, because you get deals, you get offers, it centralizes experience, and it makes it more accessible for people. But you also have this like really interesting sort of marketplace dynamic in Southeast Asia, where you have so many different companies, small businesses that are trying to obviously grow their own company and what they're doing in market, but they rely so heavily on the platforms. And so it's a real interesting melting pot. We don't have the same sort of puffy kind of marketing. In the Western world, we talk about like we got to do personalization and inclusive marketing and, and all of that. And a lot of it is actually concentrated on own channels, where in that part of the world, there's no, like, the concept of an own channel is not as important as participating in the marketplaces where the volume and the audiences are. So that's probably the biggest takeaway from me, is that it's more about mobile. It's more about users actually getting on the mobile, and it's way more accessible for most people in that part of the world. And then also it's just about platforms and dealing with platforms and ecosystems, as opposed to building out your own channel strategies. And as you say, it's like in marketing, and particularly in Australia, but in the West, it's over market, it's overthought. Everyone needs a sort of dynamic personalization strategy. Everyone needs to have all these sort of bits and bobs. But in Asia, it's just like, hey, let's go into market. Where's all the audience? All right, we're going to put out an offer and we're going to start selling.
So it's more of a distribution play then, in that sense of the word, and using that as a growth driver rather than
That's it. Yeah, it's about competing on price, competing on speed. So like, how quickly can we get it to you? But in terms of experience, it's not such a differentiator, because of these platforms, right? So going back to Flipkart's only 2% of e-commerce penetration in India. So if you look at that, there's only 2% of 1.4 billion people in India that are using Flipkart to purchase things. So there is a huge TAM opportunity just for that platform, and it's growing rapidly. And you can see why a country like India would kick out Alibaba. It just makes sense, right? They want to be able to have a country like in Singapore, they actually kicked out Uber in favor of their own app, which is called Grab. And Grab is marketed not as a ride-sharing app, it's marketed as a super app. Groceries, eating out, all kinds of services are centralized into Grab within just Singapore in that city. So you can see that it's so much more about participating in the platforms and accessing their own audiences, as opposed to differentiating with your own, say, distinct assets.
Yeah, great. And I think last time we were talking, really interesting story. We were talking about how you started Martech Weekly. And I just found the Genesis story really interesting, because it's kind of similar to what I did. Pandemics, and you're going, okay, what do I do? Got some spare time. Can you run me through like how that started again? And because your background as well is kind of interesting. We've both worked in bars and hospitality, which is, I think, really interesting, because there's a lot of things you learn. David Ogilvy was also, I'm pretty sure he's in the chefs or restaurant, or worked in restaurants or something, and then did door-to-door selling. So very frontline, sales heavy, customer focused. So anyway, how did this all start?
It's funny how both Champagne Strategy and Martech Weekly are both pandemic babies. So I've been working in marketing technology consulting. I've also worked in standing up Martech, CRMs, e-commerce, and then also managing agencies for startups as well, in-house in a startup and helping to grow particular brands. And I got about 5 years into my career, and I'm advising mostly enterprise customers, large brands. So I've been working with Illumri. They're a marketing tech consultancy. So I work with companies like Qantas Group, World Vision, big enterprise companies that are obviously trying to transform how they deal with their customers online and in digital. So after a few years working consulting, I found that over time, dealing with my clients and giving them the right advice and the right sort of the feedback in terms of strategy actually came down to, well, what's going on in the marketplace? Like what's going on in tech? How's it changing? And how are brands pivoting, adopting and adapting to an always changing landscape? There's more than I think there's almost 10,000 Martech tools in the industry now, like 10,000. About 10 years ago, it was nowhere near that number.
Sorry, that was that Scott
1,000.
Brinker thing. You're working with Scott now.
Yeah.
His map started,
Yeah.
I remember it was only 2017 or something. His map was kind of pretty small. There's a couple of players in each category. And now it's just like this beast. And I think it's so synonymous with like where SaaS tech is right now as well.
Yeah, it's exploded, right? And it's part of it is Moore's Law, which I'm sure your listeners will know about, which is just exponential change in a whole bunch of underlying technologies, rapid innovation, more accessibility, cloud coming into the picture. I just recently did a talk on this called The Third Wave. And we had, over the 90s, we had this peak in brand new companies coming on the web. So like eBay and Amazon and these sort of fundamental technology businesses. You had the second wave, and the second wave was all about that adoption of the cloud and SaaS, software as a service, actually building on top of that. And so that's really reflective in, and as you call out, I work with Scott on a media project called Big Martech. It's a YouTube show, it's a podcast, it's also a newsletter. Wonderful. As we're dissecting Martech, there's just so much is coming out. Even in the first 4 to 5 weeks of been doing it, so much has come out to market. It makes your head spin. So as you can see, I'm working with customers. I'm understanding what their needs are in terms of how they deliver Martech strategy. And there's this big problem in which it's like all these companies coming into market in the industry, it's an absolute fire hose. There's so much blogs, there's so much media. If you remember back in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, almost everyone pivoted from offline events into webinars. And I remember every man, woman, and child had their dog had a webinar, right? And everyone moved online, right? All of a sudden, you just saw Twitter threads out of everywhere. You LinkedIn posts, everyone went online because they were trying to market their SaaS
and then
company.
Everyone got sick of all these webinars and all these like video things.
And well, you know what? That whole shift did mint quite a few unicorns in that webinar online
like
event
and
space.
Stuff like that. Yeah.
Right? And it actually really shifted the paradigm, and now we're probably all going back into person and going, how wonderful it is to actually meet someone in person. John, I don't think I've met you in person. I hope we.
I'm like, that statement is so ironic right now, but I'm the same. I'm like starting to do more face to face again. I'm like, this is great. We could actually have lunch and have some food and like talk about things that are just not work related. Like actually, who are you as a person? Let's have a laugh. Or who else is sitting around? Like, this is kind of interesting. Let's have a view instead of just task monkeys. Like
online, like Zoom and Slack and email and direct messages. All of it is it's so transactional. It's like, get to the point, tell me what you want, do your pitch, and then let's move on. Not so much room for interpersonal stuff, like, as you mentioned, have a meal, get to know somebody's story. And that's, I think that's what people have been craving coming out of the pandemic. But anyway, back in 2020, I'm consulting customers, got a little bit of extra time up my sleeve. And I thought to myself, well, there's this fire hose I struggle to keep up, and I save everything I read. And so, I've got this database of like links, articles, research reports for a while. And I thought to myself, well, why don't I start something where it's literally just a recap from what I've read in Martech in that week, and share it with my audience. And I started with and I thought to myself at the time, I was reading the story of Shoe Dog, which is Phil Knight's story of the Nike founding. And he started with a similar sort of premise, which is, he literally just got some shoes from Japan and then started selling them out of the boot of his car. And he thought about it's like, when you start a company, particularly a media company, it's a long build to actually grow on. What you want to start is atomize what you want to do and do it as simply as possible. So where I started was literally a LinkedIn post. Here's 4 to 5 articles I've read and a weekly recap. And then I started with that, and then over about a month, I got some good feedback from people that were engaging. People found them helpful. Then I launched a very cheap, again, like atomize the work. Don't try and spend a lot of money on things you're trying to build straight away. But a very cheap blog. Started that, reached about 30,000 people. That was really great. And then I actually launched the newsletter, proper CMS, and then did the investment. But over that time, and then moving through into particularly the past couple of years, in how I've built this out, I've launched a podcast called Making Sense of Martech. I actually have an episode with a gentleman. His name's John James. You might know.
Oh yeah, that controversial guy on social media. Yeah.
Yeah, that guy just keeps subtweeting people. I don't know who he is. Anyway, but I effectively started this out thinking, well, how can I help my industry, which I love, Martech. It's just filled with brilliant people, great minds, really generous and really open community of people building great tech and consulting and actually trying to use it in companies. And I thought to myself, well, how can I help this community just get a snapshot? What are the things that are worth paying attention to in the Martech industry week to week? So I built the newsletter. Now it's over 65 countries, subscribers from all over the place, people who work at Amazon, people who work in the New York Times, people who work at places like WISC, which is the UK-based research group for advertising, academics, researchers, CEOs. The Kaz Order, he's the CEO of Treasure Data. I think it's a $2 billion customer data platform. He's a big fan. And so it's been this really interesting melting pot of all these different personalities within the newsletter, but then there's an online community as well where it's the more sort of nerdy corner, you would say. A lot of people sort of discussing tech, talking about latest news. And then also the podcast, Making Sense of Martech, which has been wonderful, just extrapolating on some of the themes out of the newsletter. So that's kind of been the journey so far. It's been really quite interesting. I think it breaks a few rules in terms of how a lot of advice you see online in terms of starting something, right? Can I just break a few of these down for you, okay?
Before you get into that, I was like, you see these tweets about, hey, I started a successful business and you can do the same thing in 5 steps, bang, bang, bang. And they miss all the groundwork, which you just mentioned, which is like, I validated an idea, I got a bit of a following in this, then I use that to then step up to the next thing, step, and then, successful. Whereas a lot of people just go, hey, I'm really successful. All you need to do is open a Substack subscription and bang, I'm like, yeah, except for the hardest part, which is getting people to follow you in the first place, and open your newsletter. Like writing content is is the most explicitly easy part of it. There's a skill, but getting the audience, that's much harder.
I'm going to say something that may seem a bit illogical, and then we'll work through it, and hopefully we can get to some good advice for your listeners. But I think the illogical thing here is that most people in our space, in tech and in marketing, they look at things like media companies or startups as a way to drive revenue or to grow, right? And everyone wants to grow something. Everyone wants to create revenue and value. I get that. But there is something within that is often neglected, which is personal enjoyment. I mean, as I've built the Martech Weekly newsletter, the thing that hasn't really been driving me, like I really don't care about the audience count, the subscriber count. What I care about is dissecting, analyzing the Martech industry. It's almost an art form for me. I really don't care who's reading week to week. I mean, it's wonderful to get good feedback, and sometimes I get hate mail too. That's fine, but you know what? Like the thing that really drives me is I'm trying to solve a problem in the industry, which is effectively I want to give people more clarity over what's going on in Martech and help them make better decisions. I mean, in their business. That's something that is virtuous, right? Regardless of the revenue, regardless of the audience following and the fame and all the other great things, helping people in an industry is just some good thing. So if you start with that and you think, well, how can I help people with something that's a problem in the industry, right? So I think that's like the illogical bit is like find that thing that you actually a problem that you want to solve. Actually, not just to make money, right? Like how many startup pitches have you been? And I've seen way too many of startup pitches. It's like, here's the problem. Well, on the slide, it'll be, here's the problem space and here's the TAM. And here's how much money we can make by solving this problem. And I would actually say,
there's lots of memes
and I would actually say
that.
In the early days, and I think throughout the whole journey, that doesn't matter as much as saying, well, here's a problem, and I think we have an opportunity to genuinely help anybody, to make better decisions or to do whatever they need to do in that industry. Some industries are worse than others. Some are rife with corruption, like Web3 as an industry. It's like, that's why, see Molly White, Molly White from Web3 is going great, wonderful blog. All she's doing there is exposing the fraud and all of the bad behavior and in an unregulated securities industry, right? But you know why she does it? It's because she has a storied history in Wikipedia, building out the Wikipedia pages and basically paying very little to nothing at all to keep an open source library of human knowledge intact. And she's saying, well, there's a problem in the Web3 space where all the fraud and all the bad stuff is obfuscated. So she's just bringing that out into the light. And so I'd say that, the advice is like, go make your millions before you do something virtuous. And I say that's just complete nonsense. You won't last. If you haven't got a problem you're passionate about solving, then why are you even in this? Like, yeah.
Okay, I think it's a really key point because, like you said, if you start with the target, which is the intended outcome, which is revenue or whatever, and I think this is where we can get into this own media and the discussion and the flip in the industry from being reliant on paid media channels with advertising agencies as the sort of access route to that versus maybe thinking more holistically around actually now the barriers to creating content have gone down so much, technical barriers, then the only sort of real key decider here is that you can create your own audience, but what are you going to talk about and why would someone want to read it? And I think that later question doesn't get missed. It's more like, hey, we should be doing on media. Okay, we need a newsletter. I'm like, yeah, but what are you going to put out in the newsletter? Like, why would someone sign up and read your newsletter? Like, I've got like 16 newsletters, like most of which I don't read. Like, I've got yours, and I must admit, I read it like maybe once every third issue because I've just got this stack of, not because it's not good, it's just got this stack of emails and like I just literally don't always get to it. So like I think the quality of it and matching that to an audience and being really passionate is the key standout factor. But you said something really interesting about own media. It was like the media companies are good at creating content but not good at selling it, and the people who sell aren't good at creating media, and it's like finding the junction between the two. And I think this is what I'm getting to, but you said it in a much better way.
I think there's content that is designed to sell, right? So case studies in SaaS world, there's case studies, there's articles, there's sponsored posts, there's webinars, there's a lot of consultants will start podcasts purely to drive consulting work, right? So they can demonstrate their skills and their experience and all of that in front of and build an audience, right? I get that. No, I've got some really good friends, actually. A really good friend, his name's Ben Shapiro. Not that Ben Shapiro, get that person in mind, but another person.
The
Martech podcast guy. He started the Martech podcast is in the US. It just topped the number one marketing podcast in the US, and he's been doing it for 6 years. But he actually started it out because he wanted to drive more consulting customers just for his independent freelancing. And so you've got content that's designed to sell. And I think the problem is that so much of it is there to sell. So it's poor quality. It's all influence. It's biased towards a certain viewpoint, which is, I'm not going to say critical things about my own work, am I? Or the company I represent, or the PR person's not going to put out a press release that's somewhat critical and nuanced about a new feature release. That's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. But what you have is that you have media agency, you have media companies that do a lot of sponsored content. You have podcasts and all the other channels that are basically designed to drive ad revenue. That means that they can't be 100% neutral, right? So almost every senior leader I talk to, they say, Martech industry content is over commercialized. That means that it's just everything is designed to aggressively sell whichever vendor's logo's on there as well.
Yeah, and how you can tell because there's so many plugs or links. If it's at a podcast, it's like, hey, I'm from this company. I'm like, why do you keep interviewing vendors like every single time? You know what I mean? Like, it's obvious, isn't it?
But what it does is it creates this superficial environment. I mean, Martech is interesting. It's like the intersection between people and tech. Like, where do you get that more than Martech, where you're doing marketing, you're hitting customers with messages, experiences, all kinds of things, but you're using tech to leverage that. So for me, and I think that's kind of where Scott Brinker, where he started his work doing the Martech landscape, was that he wanted to capture what's happening in such an interesting, vibrant industry because it's an intellectual pursuit. It's not just building content, creating content to sell stuff. That is, I'm sure there's a place for that and every brand needs to grow and I get it, right? But one thing I keep coming back to recently is that attention can be bought. You can go buy ads. You can go buy a ghostwriter to write your VC Twitter threads. You can go, you can go and buy an email marketer to push out email campaigns. You can buy somebody to do your webinars, right? You could buy attention, but you can't buy influence. And influence is actually driven from pure engagement with the subject matter, genuine interest, and a problem to solve, right? That's where you see influential people. And so I think there's a big gap there in like, so not just in Martech, but in so many other industries. So much of the media is about selling something and presenting a sort of non-nuanced, one-dimensional view on a particular topic, whatever that might be. And there's not a lot of people just going through the nuance and the difficulties and the challenges with understanding what's actually right and wrong, what's driving value, what's not driving value, and whatever, right? Making those shifts and changes. And
okay.
so
you hit on a really good point there, because you know how I see this expressed most explicitly, and this is a good litmus test if they've got a good content strategy, which is kind of what we're talking about, is like, have you ever seen like a corporate social media page and all they do is just constantly talk about their product and themselves? Like,
yes.
Every single post is like the same niche industry that they're in. Like this is happening with some companies that I work for. It's just like property. I'm like, yeah, we get it. You're a property company. But so what I'm trying to orientate them around is like, think about your audience. Okay, what else are they doing? What else are they interested in this time of life? And we got this really good discussion. It was like, well, actually, this stage of their life, they kind of like health issues are kind of creeping in. They're getting way more conscious about health. Okay, we need to write about health, or like not even write about it, but just like repost health. Okay, what else? Oh, well, you know, the empty nesters, the kids are kind of leaving. I'm like, well, let's write some stuff about like, you know, the family dynamics and how to keep in contact and stuff. That would be interesting to them as well, wouldn't it? Like, yeah. Okay, so then at the end of it, I'm like, you only want 20% talk about you and your product, like explicitly in your category, and you want 80% talking about everything else that that target market would be interested in and find useful. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, like that. Okay, we understand that it's not just about us, number one, this ego kind of trip. And I'm like, reverse the dynamic. It's 80% not about you, 20% about you. And then they go, oh, actually, and that's when you get really cool stuff happening. So like with you, you're probably doing like almost 100% not about you. And that's where the, like you're saying, this influence and trust comes from.
Yes. Yeah. Influence is trust. I 100% agree with that. That like, yeah. And that's what it's really interesting. We're living in this really weird period in history where you have this crazy misalignment between somebody's talents and abilities and the total audience that can view and consume what they're all about, right? Like the Kardashians is a really good example, right? You know, Kim Kardashian is a mega influencer, you know, and, you know, you have, in the tech world, you have mega influencers as well, right? But it's like disproportionate. We've never, like our generation, particularly millennials, have never had to grapple with that before, where you have these people that have these huge online followings and they just, and like, I don't understand it a lot of the time, because like sometimes I'll see a tech influencer, they'll post a Twitter thread, and then they have literally like 400 comments and discussions happening beneath them. And it's like, why even participate in such a noisy conversation? What are you trying to get out of that? But my view is that like there's, those people are masterminds of building trust. Doesn't necessarily mean they're the smartest people. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the most nuanced views, right? Often, what gets a lot of attention in online spaces is outrage and, you know, controversy and gossip and, you know, or, you know, good looking people, right? It's all the stuff that's at the bottom of the brainstem, right? It's the lizard brain stuff that gets all the attention. I mean, you know, like you've seen, like you've more than probably John, you've been in this industry for ages, and you see the dark depths of Twitter. And the stuff that goes viral is just absolute nonsense, right?
It's a stuff.
So that's
it's
what
funny.
I'm saying is that like,
but even on LinkedIn, like the posts that have got the most actual revenue for me have been some of my most unpopular things. So I'm like, yeah, I know that the algorithms post about getting that person, keeping them on the platform to the lowest common denominator. They're not my buyers. Like, in fact, most of the people that interact with that post are ghost followers, like the big proportion of them, because they're all like executives and stuff, and like they can't comment on things. So it's kind of this weird dynamic, and like, yeah, it's the ones which just get this trigger and then people buy, but they're not the wide appeal ones. So it's kind of like this, I don't know, this algorithmically based anxiety that people are like, hey, I need this content to be really popular. I'm like, no, you don't. Number one. So anyway.
Well, like one example is, do you remember the Apple? Like this was years ago. The Apple Big Brother TV ad. Do you remember that?
No.
You ever seen that? So it was one of the most iconic Apple ads where it was literally it was a cinema. It was kind of like a stage, and there was this robotic looking guy up on the screen, and then the whole audience were wearing grey, and they were all uniform, and they were kind of it's like this mind enslavement type motif. And then
1984.
Yeah, 1984. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Then, yeah. So like, and then you had the lady that came through, and then she flew a javelin through. It was a javelin, it was a hammer, and flew it through into the screen. And it's interesting about that because like, why like Apple at that stage were trying to sell a Mac, like they weren't like, what is that? There's a political commentary. What are they trying to say? And I think they were trying to say that Apple is that they're positioning themselves as like a creative freeing technology compared to Microsoft, which is an enslaving technology, right? Like that was a juxtaposition they're trying to create. But like what's so interesting is that that's picking up on it's picking up politics, it's picking up on cultural norms, it's picking up on a whole bunch of different things, right? And that's what I'm saying is that like I've recently had a SaaS company that I had a discussion with, and I've started talking with a SaaS company because of some of their controversial takes online. They've wrote some really great articles, and they've forced this new conversation in the Martech industry. And I won't name them because I don't want to embarrass them or whatever. But anyway, I sat down with them. I said, well, look, it's interesting that you've started this new argument, right? What you're saying is really controversial, and you're getting all the attention of all these other tech CEOs, and they want to chip in on this conversation. But I said, my number one problem is that you're not talking to your customer. You're talking to your peers. You're picking up on a cultural moment, yes, but you're not talking to people. The people are actually buy your product. And often that person that's going to buy your product, they're not really caring about that whole tech discussion that's happening. What they do care about is getting promoted. Or what they do care about is impressing their boss. Or what they do care is saving, say, 2 or 3 hours a day on manual labor, right? And so you look at it and you're like, well, what do people actually want out of their job, out of their role? And those conversations are more anthropological and philosophical than the growth hackers might have you seen, right? The growth hackers will like, do the bottom of the brainstem stuff, right?
Work the volume, right? And that's the argument. It's like, but out of that volume, you've got a certain percentage that will buy. And like, well, yeah, but what's the opportunity cost of that? Like, it's a good argument. Yeah. And advertising industry does the same thing. It's like, if you target enough people with broad reach, you'll eventually get some customers, and you need to refresh memory structures, all this bullshit. And that can be true, but it's also very expensive, wasteful, allocation of resources, like especially if you've got a small target market. So like, I think, the key sort of takeaway here that I'm getting is like deep understanding of your target market and customer is central to all marketing, whether it's content strategy, whether it's sales, understanding objections, how to pitch something. It's like, that is the gold stuff that I think gets overlooked. And that's, once you understand that, then you can create some cool content off the top of that. But like, it starts there.
It starts with curiosity and genuine inspiration, like an insight.
So how have you done that? Because I'm sure you started more from okay, this is what I'm interested in, and these are the things people aren't talking about, right? But it wasn't like, hey, bang, you hit on the really juicy stuff straight away. I'm sure you had some hits or misses, and you're like, oh, actually, I'll change that. That sort of people were talking about, so I'll double down on that, and then sort of evolve from there with that feedback loop in. Run me through maybe some ways you're doing that.
Well, it's interesting, right? Like there's two streams with let's talk about TMW for a minute. Like, there's two streams to it. There's the growth and development of my own skills, right? So as I've gone down the path, I've got an essay section in each newsletter, and that essay section gets longer and longer and longer because I have more to talk about. But
I noticed.
That's just honing the skill weekly, right? Like building that skill of writing. It's actually, I was walking down the road the other day, I was thinking like just honing that skill of writing. It's almost like a superpower in a lot of ways. Like you get very good at communicating, you get very fast at writing. You can actually produce content quicker, but you also become more curious about the world, and you get more sort of. You start thinking as a writer, and you think, and you sort of want to develop and analyze things. More often. So like that's been one track. It's just developing that. I think I'm interested. The other thing is that, I would call them PMF signals, like product market fit or content market fit signals, right? And, a lot of founders, like that whole question of product market fit is like totally abstracted. There's no metric. There's no ARR metric that's going to say you got product market fit. But what I would say is that as soon as you get one person asking for more, it's like, all right, let's go. That one moment for me was,
and that's usually representative of like
yeah.
100 other people, because the
Yeah.
other 99 will never talk to you because, you know, for whatever reason. So generally I find it's like, it's a small sample, but it's indicative of a much larger population.
Exactly. Yeah, it's indicative, but doesn't that really even matter if it's indicative? You have one like flesh and blood human being. For me personally, there was a lady when I was transitioning from a blog to a newsletter where she said, "How can I?" She reached out to me on cold LinkedIn. She messaged me. She said, "Hey, how can I subscribe with my email address? I want to stay updated on this stuff." And that for me was that a flesh and blood human being that I've never met before has reached out to me and asked me, "Hey, can I get an update?" And that was, for me, that was the only thing I needed to go, all right, let's go build a CMS and a proper newsletter platform to go make it happen. And I think that's the thing, is that you want people that are proactively giving you thoughts and feedback, but also, I mean, just take it with a sense of, yeah, those people probably don't know what they want either. I mean, most companies, they look at NPS scores like they're the Bible, and really they're just an indication of sentiment at that point in time. Customers are chaotic. Customers saying so many things of brands at so many different points of time. You capture one sliver, say 10 seconds of their attention on them thinking about a specific brand. How much does that actually tell you about their sum total experience? Well, what will tell you more is that they're proactively asking you for things, or proactively giving you positive or negative feedback. Sometimes I'll get feedback. Say a little while ago, I stepped out of my niche, if you want to call it that. And when the Ukraine situation just started to unfold, I was really obviously concerned about that. But I also have a bunch of people in my subscriber base who are actually who are also in the Martech community, and they're being displaced out of Ukraine as well. So I wrote this essay on Ukraine and Martech and the industry and what this will do to all the tech industry, and then also how like Martech tools like social media is influencing something like the Ukraine situation. And so I thought to myself, well, I'm going to write this article. And then I got the amount of feedback I got back from that essay that was totally outside of my comfort zone. It was commenting on politics, which is, definitely not my wheelhouse. But anyway, the amount of feedback I got from that was just awesome, right? And a lot of it was emotional. A lot of it was very, very, very reflective as well. And so, it's kind of interesting. Like I was talking to a friend the other day. It's like the company you keep determines the company you keep, right? So who like when it comes to building a brand, it's a lot of it's about your personal taste, right? Like I genuinely really enjoy interacting with people like you, John. People who are thoughtful, people who are critical, and that's not everyone in the industry, right? That's not everyone. I'm sorry, right? I have a vehemently disgust for growth hackers, right? And these people that are like, they'll promise you the world. All they care about is driving PPC and, growth and making money is all they care about. Like for me, it's like, those people are not really the people I like talking with. And, the taste of how you develop a brand or a company is actually part of your own personal taste. So that's what I'm going back to. Like so much of this stuff that we talk about in marketing, we think it's about numbers, it's about positioning and abstract concepts, but so much of it is about us. It's about who we are as people, what we genuinely enjoy. And I don't understand why so much of marketing doesn't to reflect that, how your own personal tastes, the things that you genuinely enjoy, and as I go back to the top of the call, the personal problems that you're trying to solve in the industry, they're not reflected often in media. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
I think it's a good point. There's this duality I think you need to have in terms of like, this is who I am, and take it or leave it. And there's definitely a part to that. There's also, though, the caveat to that is that you still need to have your ear to the market and the customer. So you can't be closed-minded, but you must pick a lane and stick to it and listen to the feedback. Not always act on all the feedback. You got to make that judgment call. But it's like, I think people they think this dichotomy thing, I got to please everyone and do what they want. And that just leads you down a rabbit hole because, like you said, customers don't know what they want often. So you need to guide them there and go, hey, this is us. And we're open to feedback, but also we're going to be prepared to say no and put our foot down, like if it's something that's not us, And then on the flip side, you can't just be a bull at a gate, like a sort of polarizing journalistic sort of figure who, just is ready to squash everyone in between to get what they want, because then the customer's going, well, you don't really care about me and you're just going to run me over anyway. I'm just getting used here. So I think it's kind of both, but I'm always I think in the past, one of my mistakes has been to try and please everyone. Like you said, with the negative feedback, like I'm online. I have to be more controversial than if you actually met me and had a conversation. And because just the way social media works, I got to sometimes like talk about things I know to be wrong, just to see how people like react. I try not to do that very often, but like sometimes you got to be a bit cheeky. You know what I mean? But yeah, people get offended and they start blocking me and stuff. And it was like, okay, well, I used to take that personally. Now I'm just like, it's just part of the game. The people that hate me the most actually are like the advertising sort of strategic planner people who are just all brand. I find I annoy them really easily for whatever reason. So maybe that's kind of my equivalent of the growth hackers. But I think it's a bit of both. But like sometimes I think if you're too afraid of offending people and too afraid of negative blowback, I think that's a bad thing, because you're trying to be standoffish to everybody, and then you kind of become nothing to no one in particular, if you know what I mean. It's a positioning thing.
And I wonder, maybe it's not a positioning thing, but it's a confidence thing.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
I mean, a lot of people struggle with confidence in marketing.
What's that whole political risk thing? I think it's kind of like, that, oh crap, we can't offend anyone, otherwise, we're gonna negative press, and they're like hyper risk adverse. I think that's bad. Like, in fact, offending people can actually cause great publicity. Like, you know what I mean? Like, not intentionally offending them, but accidentally causing controversy and going, oh crap, that didn't work. You can actually benefit from that, and that's what PR agencies do. So.
And that's what I'm saying is that particularly the bigger the brands are, and I work with mostly enterprise brands, the amount of risk mechanisms, even just to get, say, a on-site A/B test out to market or a single email campaign, I mean, it is like, you got so many checks and balances. And so I think about, so it's kind of an interesting inverse of, what we're talking about here, but like there's this concept of content sanitation. Yeah. Which basically it goes through so many rounds of feedback that it just becomes so bland, and there's nothing really interesting. There's no original. There was original thought and there was original perspective, but now it's just so bland and so neutered from what it was.
You guys are not even doing it, basically. Have you seen Draper's The Bland Book, I think it's called, instead of Brand Book?
Bland?
Yeah, he did this thing.
I haven't heard of the book, but I know that there's this concept of blanding, which is the homogenization.
They did this meme deck, basically, a parody about all that, going, hey, if you want a bland brand, follow these steps. Create a committee for decision making and creative. Like, say no to everything. Yeah. I think it was Ryan Wallman and which is Dr. Draper on Twitter, and maybe Giles from Call to Action guy UK, I think. Anyway, don't quote me on that.
Yeah,
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, see, it's really interesting, right? Like this, the blanding, like you're seeing that with a lot of, in fashion, you're seeing that with all of the logos going down into Helvetica fonts and sans serif fonts. It's all black and it's all nuded, so you lose all that distinctiveness, right? And it's all homogenized. And then you've got B2B SaaS companies that use a branding style called corporate Memphis. You've probably seen it if you've seen any Google page. It's just, you've got the people, illustrated people in geometric shapes.
God, it's so annoying. Or the guitar, ukulele music on their sort of their brand product walkthrough video, in the background. And you just say, oh my God.
Yeah, and that's it, right? And then we actually, Scott and I, for Big Martech, the show, we just did a thing on Martech gobbledygook, which is so much abstraction to like how SaaS companies talk about their own products on their websites. And it's just like so much. One of the examples was from a company. It's like, use real-time customer data to create marketing magic. It's like, what the hell does that even mean? It sounded like clearly the branding department's been in that too much. And then you also have, and I can perhaps share in the show notes for your listeners, there's some great stats coming out on the blandiness in even in our media and entertainment. So if you look at the amount of original stories that are coming out in the cinema box office, over the past 5 years, that's been declining. It's all reruns. It's all Matrix 4, or it's all Marvel Studios.
Everything's a remix, right? It's like Marvel 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, X-Men 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, because it's a risk mitigation thing. It's like, well, we're so afraid of failure now that we'll just it's just lower risk and more predictable just to iterate on something that's already. And I think, okay, there's truth to that from a financial perspective, but what gets lost is like the big winners, which require big failures and big risks to be taken, and an appetite for both, unfortunately.
Well, an example is The Matrix. I mean, when they were producing that movie, the script was so unusual, right? It was that whole, computer simulation theory very wild, very unique concept that wasn't really tackled in cinema before, but they wrapped it around the sort of action motif and they turned it into a really successful franchise. But that was a huge risk, right? But they were so creative and they believed in the idea that they went for it. And so you think about that and you're like, well, what is causing all this homogeny and all this blandness in our movies, in our copywriting, in our music? Even in our music is becoming more homogenous. In our branding and our logos, in the way we talk about things, it's all becoming more bland. Well, why is that? I think part of it is that we're just more distracted than ever.
Yeah.
I think that is a big part of it. Social algorithms trend towards the most popular content based on engagement. Those things become more homogenous over time, like any sort of computation. That all trends towards a mean, like in the bell curve.
Right? I call it the regression to the mean. I did this fortune cookie regression to the mean. Like, have you seen on LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff how everyone's like using the same sort of thing? And it's just like eventually the bigger the person gets, the more watered down the message becomes, the more generic it is, and then it goes into this kind of like platitude. It's just kind of meaningless platitudes, and then they become like a fortune cookie, basically, like something you'd open out of a fortune cookie, and you eventually become. Oh, I had a joke that at the end of this regression is like Simon Sinek, because that's basically, if you've ever followed him, what he talks about. It's like a motivational poster in a tweet or a LinkedIn post. So I think it's funny. The bigger you get, the more generic your message becomes by default. It's about fighting that natural kind of force in a way. I don't know. You got to like fight against it. If there's no one to champion that fight, especially like you're saying, enterprise organizations, like it just naturally goes there. It becomes risk averse. Don't want to offend anyone. We got more customers now. Panic stations. I'm like, well, this is going to be boring content that no one wants to watch or listen or read. So you're going to shoot yourself in the foot.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think one aspect of this is that people are just reading less. People are reading less novels, less storybooks. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to read so much, but I don't even read any really at all anymore. I mean, I'm so addicted to Twitter and LinkedIn, I'll admit it myself, that content's being served and fed to me as opposed to me seeking it out, me going to the bookstore. Even like the whole idea of, like,
that discovery process, right? That kind of like that search for something that you stumble over, or you talk to a friend and it's like, oh, that's a really interesting thing. I've never heard that before. It's outside of my sphere of normal, typical algorithmic influence, right?
Yeah, our algorithm, I think like one of the most detrimental, and I don't think anyone talks about this really, is that algorithmic content is a detriment to creativity because you don't stumble, to your point, exactly to your point, John, is that you don't stumble across the things that you never would have come across. Like we used to go to Video Easy or to Blockbuster Video and then walk the aisles to pick up a DVD, right? On Friday night, you're going to get some takeout and have dinner and watch a movie, right? Now we don't do that. The Netflix algorithm serves up the next best recommended
the top 10 that are trending this week, and guess what? And then you go, oh, I'll get that one. Everyone else can't be wrong,
Exactly. And that's my point, is that we're in this environment of homogeneity where you do have brands that really stand out, and they stand out so much because everyone else is just so homogenous. I think it's quite an interesting space. And so that's what I'm saying is that, when you find unique thinkers, you got to hold on to them, right? People who perhaps dress a bit differently, they have maybe purple colored hair, who cares? Or, people that maybe from different backgrounds, right? Like we haven't really touched on both our backgrounds in hospitality. So, I spent 6 years working as a chef. I did my chef's apprenticeship. And I worked in hospitality. It's just so multicultural, right? So I learned all these different types of languages and different cuisines and, all kinds of different people from walks of life, backpackers, people that have been working for years and years and years, people who do like corporate career changes into hospitality and cooking. And it's a real melting pot of culture. But one of the things that I find really great about hospitality, you don't see this in a lot of spaces, is that as soon as a customer enters the dining room, like particularly in fine dining, as soon as they're in there, everything is about them. The entire experience is geared towards that user, that person. It's all about them. It's about the smells. It's about the music, the ambiance, the attitude of the wait staff, the sommelier, the selection of wines, the menu, the specials, how quick it goes out, what's the bill. All of that stuff is focused on the customer. When the customer comes in, you don't think of anything else except for serving that customer, right? And that's one thing I feel like it's sort of rubbed off on me, is that for our brands and for the companies that we serve or consult with, bringing back that centricity is so simple, but so obfuscated in enterprise brands, right? We spend way too much time navigating politics and mitigating risk than we do just serving a customer and looking at their experience, right? And so that's one of the things that obviously grates on me, because my background for years is like, yep, 6 p.m., service starts, nothing matters except for producing amazing food on time and delivering that experience.
And plying people with champagne.
Exactly right. Well, restaurants make most of their money. Most of their
But
margin.
yeah, you're right. It's a really good experience, and I think we were discussing this about the perfect competition nature of restaurants. Like, I would never go into restauranting because I just know from talking to having worked in one, but also multiple ones, but also talking to my finance friends, are like, that is the easiest way to lose money. Never open a restaurant, never open a cafe. Like, you have to be stupid. But I think that is the ultimate stress test of any good marketer, because if you can make that work and have some kind of profit margin out of that, or even just break even, you're pretty good. You've got something going on there. You know what I mean? So it's like the ultimate stress test. The most lax test you could ever do would be work for a big established brand, enterprise customers, everything's already set up, and you're just kind of coming there doing some, TVCs and working with an agency, very hands off. You don't get exposed to all those variables, like, the destination, who's opening up next door, are they going to take away your customers, like the variability of the service staff, have to deal with crazy chefs on drugs, or like, learning how to upsell and increase the AOV of your guests. Like, oh, actually, if you get a bottle of wine, I can do this. I don't know if you've ever been to, what's the street in Melbourne? The one where they sort of like hawk you almost, the hustle you for the alleyway, not Hargraves.
Oh, the Grave?
Yeah. That's one of them, the alleyway too.
The alleyway where there's restaurants. There's that, and there's up in the north as well. There's
that's what I'm thinking of.
Another street
near Coke's Wine Bar. They always try to hustle you and go, hey, if you come here, I'll give you a free bottle of wine. It's probably some just like $4 plonk, clean skin. But anyway, the point is, like, you learn sales techniques from that, and I think if you've ever worked front of house as well. I mean, I've done both, but just that. Sometimes you're just dealing with emotions of the customer. Like, they're angry, they're never going to be pleased no matter how good the food is, and you can't control that. And other times, it is the food. And I think there's this sort of like melting pot of service and product, tangible, intangible factors that all go into this ultimate like customer experience, if you will. And there's some elements that you control and some things you can't. And and you're trying to make money out of it. It's competitive, it's dynamic. One time you're the hot restaurant, 4 weeks later you're not the hot restaurant anymore. Everyone wants to go to Dorsia, or whatever. It's a good learning. I learned a lot from grubby growth marketing from that experience. So it's good.
I think it's so key. I mean, just getting out, like, a lot of bigger brands will get their marketing teams into the stores or into the front lines just to give them a 10-second taste of it, right? It's like, gosh, we're so, like, marketing as a department is so isolated from customers and so abstracted, where that's part of the problem. Just rubbing shoulders and being in the midst, it's just so valid. Like, that's why startups are so dynamic and often have the innovative ideas, is that they're just so close to the edges. Like Matt Mullenweg from Automatic, he's the CEO of WordPress and Tumblr and a few others. And he says, it gets so boring in the middle of the organization, where you got the marketing execs, you got the operating officers, the CEO, you got, the legal team, it's so boring. Like, but all the interesting stuff happens at the edges, at the coalface of where the customer is, So, I think that's really interesting, right? Like, even 2 days ago, I had a discussion with the customer I'm working with right now. And that discussion was about, hey, we want to sort of inject more personality into this specific experience. And they said, oh, we can't really touch this thing because it has legals, T's and C's. And I said, well, what about the image? What if we give that person like an interesting hat, or, something like a little bit weird or unique that makes the customer laugh, right? Like, can we optimize this to make a customer laugh? How many people have asked that question, or make them smile, like the reason why Amazon's logo is a smile A to Z is because they want to make people smile, right? They want to make people happy with the products they've purchased and how they get them. And I think that's part of it. There's so much humanity in all of that. There's so much that marketing abstracts away into numbers, politics, and risk aversion that I just see that I think that, and I hope that, I hope Byron Sharp and, all the academics in their ivory tower, they come back to this. It's like, this is not just science. This is humanity. This is anthropology. This is understanding people, right? I mean, we've talked about Mark Ritson and Byron Sharp and all of these other people who are, in the academic sphere, having these sort of very theoretical conversations where most of the magic happens when you're just understanding that with your customer, right? When you're understanding them. And it's not through surveys and NPS scores. It's actually perhaps serving them and getting in their world a little bit and talking to them as people, right? We're just in Martech is just all these layers of abstraction, and it's impossible to see through all of that into the reality, which is, well, this is how a customer enjoys your product, and this is what resonates with them.
On that note, then, what do you think are the most sort of overhyped, sort of buzzwordy, sort of Martech things that underneath aren't really useful?
Oh, John, please don't ask this question. I mean, it is like,
who are you going to offend here?
Yeah. I don't even care, right? But the thing is, well, buzzwords are an interesting concept, right? Who invented the concept of buzzwords?
Politics.
Maybe we could start there. Well, maybe, right? Buzzwords.
Well, you know what? This is where it comes from. It's politically sellable within the organization. I do this intentionally, even with an initiative. You've got to brand the initiative. Like, you got to give it a name that actually is kind of like a catchphrase that is a brand within itself, that is like attractive, that people want to associate with, so that the project actually has wings and can sell within the organization so that it actually gets completed. Like I'm saying, some of the most powerful things for growth marketing are just some of the most boring shit. Like actually doing one-on-one interviews. Like, time consuming, unscalable, unsexy. No one wants to do it because they're afraid of what the customer says. Nobody even knows who the customers are. Sometimes getting that detail is really hard, and no one does it. So it's like one of the most basic things you can do that is missed. So like, again, buzzwords sound cool because they're sellable. And I think when you attach tech that it claims to solve these big hard problems, and it has a kind of a cool, techie, I'm buying into the techie vibe. I'm modern, maybe as a boomer marketing exec, I need to like pretend that I know actually how to use tech when I don't. We'll get that software, that CDP, DMP with the bells and whistles. That sounds good. Yeah, can I get a data lake as well? It's like ordering a Happy Meal. It's like, oh, and can you throw in, can you throw in some semantic AI, ML, automatic, blah, 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 blah. Like, oh, that sounds good. So if I'm a consulting firm, I'm selling this package like that to an exec is sellable. Like, I'm working on our new CDP, project. So what are you working on? Oh, well, this is more important, and we'll have our unified data in one place. And then, I think it goes from there. So that's where I think buzzwords come from. They come from the fact that they have currency in political environments.
Well, yes and no. So buzzwords, if you strip away, like the concept of a buzzword is a buzzword in its own right. Like if you think about it that way, right, it's just a form of semantics, right? So if you think about it, you've got in every tribe culture on the face of the earth, they have in and out groups, and that's determined a lot by language. I'm going to go to Europe at the end of the year with my family, and I don't know a word of French. I mean, parlez-vous français? Maybe that's it. And then, but there's an in and out group right in the nation, right? Would you call French a package of buzzwords? No. And so when I was doing hospitality, and then I moved and I actually started going to a church. This was about 10 years ago. I was invited along to a church, and then I walked into the church for the first time. This is a Christian church, and I did not know any of the words. It was like, what's repentance? What's communion? What the hell is what is this savior stuff? What is sin? What is all these random words, right? And I'm like, it's a whole language. It's a whole ecosystem of language, right? And it's the same thing with this, mate. Like, we talk about buzzwords and how annoying they are, but I think there's a helpful function on establishing who's the in group, who's the out group, right? If you know what omni-channel marketing is, then you're a part of probably the in group, right? The only other element that's dynamic in the marketing and the tech space is that we have vendors who create concepts to sell things.
And
that's
positioning.
Your point, right? It gets cut through, right? Like, what's the modern data stack? Well, that's just Snowflake injecting language into the environment to introduce this concept. It's modern, it's data, and it's a stack. Oh, you don't want to archaic my data stack, do you? You don't want a legacy data. You want a modern one, right? And so language is a creative expression of how we communicate, convince people to do things, how to sell, and but I would say that holistically, it's no different from me walking into a church or my family arriving in Paris and we're trying to find our hotel and figuring that out because we don't know French. People have in and out groups, and our marketing industry has the same dynamics, which is human nature, plain and simple.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. Positioning, buzzwords comes from intentional positioning. Like, I'm not a lead gen agency; we're a demand gen agency. I'm like, oh, we're not a performance marketing; we're a brand marketing. I'm like, so I know there's intentional positioning where you go, well, we want to differentiate ourselves from that thing or that legacy thing or that other group, so we will say this instead of that and create that clear demarcation. So I think it is also intentional product of brand positioning and product positioning. So yeah, not just the language thing. I get it. Like, most of what I do during the day is translate between teams who use different languages. Like, if I'm in growth and I'm talking to marketing, I'm talking about, reach and brand semantics and buzzwords. And then I'm going to translate that to the product team so they kind of understand why that's important. And then, I'm talking about, roadmaps and shuffling Jira tickets or whatever. Like, it's very obvious if you haven't worked in there, if you use the wrong language. They're like, well, it becomes very quickly apparent that you don't know what you're talking about or haven't been exposed to that before, right? So yeah, I think there's some of that as well, for sure, especially in tech.
I've got a colleague, he's Aaron Spinley, and he does a bunch of keynotes, some great writing. He has this publication called The Headway, and he talks about this in one of the Making Sense of Martech episodes. He says that part of the problem with buzzwords and language and semantics and why, like the example, right? Like, I was talking with somebody in San Francisco in a recent event that I was doing keynote in. I was talking to someone that's like, there's revenue ops, sales ops, growth ops, partner ops, marketing ops. It's like, okay, just attach something onto ops, operations, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's so confusing. Like, what the hell does all this stuff even mean? But like, part of it is, and Aaron Spinley makes a great point, is that more mature industries have more uniform language, right? So in the legal profession, right, like, you have to actually learn the language of the law to be able to articulate that to a judge, because it's all standardized, because that's based on hundreds of years of history. Same thing with medical profession. You ask a nurse, you say, give me a scalpel, and then the nurse should know what a scalpel is. They're not going to say, well, if you say, hey nurse, hand me an omni-channel marketing strategy, and they scratch your head and go, well, what the fuck is that? Okay, maybe some email marketing. You know what I mean? So that's that. So there's this whole interesting angle here where legacy industries have more uniform language, whereas our industry, which is so unique and novel, and most people are first generation into it, it means that, there is going to be a lot of confusion with semantics. There's going to be a lot of creativity because there's not a lot of legacy to fall back on. We're inventing this stuff as we go, and that's totally fine. Like, I'm here for it. Buzzwords cannot be just a negative thing. It's a positive thing. It's creativity as well. I know you probably don't want to hear that, but anyway, what are your thoughts? And you're on mute.
Sorry, some of the content you could be creating, obviously we'll hit on these buzzwords, and it's a really good content piece. Like, let's decipher this speak in the industry and what this really means. And I've done my most popular YouTube piece was on that. It's like, what is brand marketing versus performance marketing? And TLDR response to that is that it's just a fictitious thing, but like, it's still my most popular video for sure. And then I've seen, months later, people parroting, and then obviously watched it and then sort of like thought about it themselves and gone, actually, yeah, that's interesting, but I would put it this way. And then you're going to get this like virality effect of iterations on that theme. It's pretty interesting. But look, coming back to content, having both personal experience in creating, distributing and promoting it and growing something from nothing, I just want to get, what do you think about, we've talked about creating the content and how that process may work, like having your ear to the customer, putting yourself out there and just seeing what works, using that feedback loop, getting bigger, stepping up stones from something quite easy and investing in something and going from there into different formats. But we did touch a tiny bit on repurposing. So using a core piece of content and then creating a tweet from a longer blog post, creating a video of something, using a podcast, creating a blog off the back end of that. But what about the key thing here, which I think is my other 80-20 rule, which is, okay, don't talk about you, 80% not about you, 20% about you. And then the next thing is like 80% distribution promotion, 20% creation. And I think everyone gets this the wrong way. They go 80% about me, and then 80% creation, 20% promotion distribution. And that's where I see the biggest fail. But what do you view, Len, of the years?
I'm going to talk about some non-obvious things because I'm thinking I'm chucking out a bunch of ideas for this episode because I want perhaps for your audience, have them think about things that perhaps not be so obvious. So a few that have really stuck out to me is ritual. So ritual is a really interesting concept. The Martech Weekly newsletter comes out in the US because the majority of my audience is in the US. It comes out every Sunday morning around the same time. Somebody's probably going to make their coffee or their breakfast, right? And that's the ritual that a lot of readers have grabbed. Is that's part? It's like ingrained.
So it's the new
in
newspaper. Instead of opening the newspaper, having a coffee, it's the Martech Weekly, having a coffee.
Yeah, and why has print journalism been so successful before the internet hit it? Well, it's because of the ritual. Yeah. I mean, it's part of, why do we watch Netflix every night and binge it? It's just ritual. I mean, we're beasts, we're animals of ritual and routine. I mean, being in a good routine is sort of synonymous with having a healthy lifestyle. When you don't have a routine, it's very hard to be fit. It's very hard to eat well. It's very hard to be mentally stable. So routine is something that I don't think a lot of marketers talk about so much, which is, so for the Martech Weekly, it goes out every Sunday and around that time of breakfast and intentionally so, because I want to create a ritual, a meeting point with my audience. And that's a really good part of their weekly, their career cycle and their weekly cycles. And so I think the ritual aspect is really important because ritual creates stickiness and virality and sharing. And then you get that word of mouth, which is,
and
really
I think dependability and trust is like, this is the mistake I made. And then after talking to you, I'm like, oh crap, I need to do this regularly because I'm very irregular, just the nature of my job. And we get to the end of the year. I'm like, oh, I got so much other projects on. And people are like, oh, you said you did that webinar like 2 weeks ago. I'm like, yeah, sorry, I'm actually got other things on. So I can see how that sort of churns people and turns them off your brand because then they're like, well, I don't trust you because you're not dependable. So yeah, I definitely get that.
Exactly. I mean, with Making Sense of Martech podcast, that is intentional. Like every episode I say, this is irregular. This is the conversations as they happen. There's no cadence to it really. Once a fortnight roughly. But it hasn't grown as much as the newsletter. It hasn't been as significant because of that ritual. It's just the compounding effect. Like a lot of, you can get to the 1%. What was it stat? I think you've got that stat as well. It's like, if you can reach more than 23 episodes in a podcast, you will get the most, you will be in the 1%.
Oh, yeah. I think there's some stat where like the vast majority of people do it and they quit within 10 episodes or something crazy. And then, then your reach, if it's above 50 per episode or something, it's like, you're in the top 1%, which is like crazy when you think about it. So you must think how many people start and finish and don't continue. So I think it's just habit and then just that long non-linear growth curve. You need to stick to it for a long period of time. And that can be used as an excuse for non-performance, like, or an excuse for like, oh, well, this takes a long time. So you have to be really careful about believing that too much, but also there is method, I think, and truth in that because it's much slower at the start than it is at the end. Like my podcast in the last 6 weeks or 4 weeks has just gone crazy. And then each new shout out gets you another shout out. Each new person gets you another person. Yeah. And then it suddenly just upticks and blows up, which is kind of where I'm getting right now. So anyway.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is that I think part of the reason why so many podcasts don't get past, say, episode, I think 23 is the golden one where it's like, do you really want to be in the top 1% of podcasts? You just need to get past 23 episodes. Big part of that is that most people just can't stick to a timeline. They just can't stick to it. They haven't got the patience for it. I mean, part of it is like the turtle in the hare. I mean, the turtle is just going to win because they can just go for longer, right? Yeah. And that's what not everyone wants to hear. It's like if you want to build a lot of demand, really influential, say, content channel. Part of it is there's the 0.0001% of people who go viral, say on TikTok or on Twitter, and they have these massive audiences. But you know what? A lot of it, like majority, is just patiently and consistently in the content coal mines producing stuff, right? There's one guy, which I'll give a shout out, very esoteric. He's an AI researcher. His name's Arun. That's his Twitter handle name. And he was in the coal mines for like 6 years just posting random memes. And then Andreessen Horowitz picked up on him. And then he created this whole idea of shape rotators and word cells, right? And this whole idea of the engineering concepts of different mental models. And Andreessen Horowitz from A16Z picked up on it and he went viral. And then he's got this huge following. But he's like, nobody talks about the whole 5-6 years of just consistently being there, And that's the thing. I think ritual, meeting point, a ritual is really powerful if you can consistently stick to it. And that's what I'm saying is that a lot of the majority of marketing use cases from channel and content comes down to being consistent and doing something valuable. That just comes back to intrinsic motivation. I mean, it's very hard to stick with something for a long time period if you're not genuinely interested in it, right? And so I think that's one bit. The other side, you talked about like atomizing content. So you do like one asset, you break it down in different bits, flip it upside down and do assets before you write content or before you create it. So I'll ask controversial questions. One question just recently was, I'm like, at the moment, I'm just getting a lot of SaaS startup founders reach out to me, and they are pitching me their products. And a lot of them, particularly the most interesting Martech companies, are all from India, man. Like they're all living in India. And they're all like first generation founders, and they've never worked in tech, and they've got these unique ideas. And I put out a LinkedIn post on it, and I said, hey, like, it just seems like there's a lot of great innovation happening in India. Who can I talk to about that? Tag someone. I'm really interested in it. Just seems to be a lot of great stuff coming out. And that post blew up. It was really popular. A lot of comments, a lot of DMs, a lot of.
I think I said go to the CB Insights team, because that's the kind of like the people that I know that sort of do something similar to you, but for tech in general.
Yeah, well, and Ed's saying, well, yeah, exactly, right. But you chimed in and gave some help. So that is like, and then I did the actual piece, and then the feedback was really good. I did an essay on Martech in India. And so you look at that, it's like, well, I didn't atomize anything. I just built their momentum, right, by asking questions. Like social media, particularly social media, is all about just socializing. Like ask a question.
I think
well, you don't need to spend hours and hours. I think
just like who's that guy from Refine Labs as well? Walker. Sorry, I forget his first name. He's been on my show, but he is always talking about this because he's a big content player, and so did Patrick Campbell. So if anyone's listening, definitely listen to those two episodes because we talk a lot about content and what people get right and wrong as well. But I think like what things came out of that was like social media is like totally a research tool. He said it's like a pre-validation research tool for then something that I invest my time in. And journalists are the same. They'll see a trending topic, they go, oh well, that is hot right now, so I'll create a longer piece off that and insert it into my weekly newsletter. And I think if you just view social media as like a platform to distribute what you want to say, you miss the most valuable part, which is the interaction, the comments, the surveying and sort of the combat and testing these things. And I think that's the bigger value of social media.
No, I agree. I 100% agree. It's the interaction with people. It's like, sure, Twitter's got a lot of bots. There's a lot of sort of artificial reach and engagement. I mean, that's just the reality of dealing with these open platforms, is that there's just going to be a lot of spam and a lot of fake stuff, right? Like I don't know about you, but recently, every day I'm getting 5 or 6 DMs from NFT people asking me if I want a job promoting their stuff, or they've got this new pump and dump scheme that they want me to join. And a lot of that's just automated bots. And, that's obviously, not great for people, but, artificial interactions with bots is.
Hey, so what about, I mean, we're talking about repurposing here, small sound bites, testing, so it will be popular, right? And then get virality is, I think, what you're talking about, like getting recommendations. But what are the key sort of ways you've found are very successful at promoting your content and getting it out to more people? Is it just the quality? Because people just go, oh, do great quality and it will sort of take care of itself. And it's sort of true, but also there's some things that I've noticed that have really kicked me up a leg that then makes that next quality piece kick up a leg again. You know what I mean? So it's like self-fulfilling in a way. For me, the podcast has been a natural, organic social media mentions, like things I haven't paid for. People just going, hey, you should listen to this podcast because I really liked this episode. And then that's happened 3 or 4 times now. And each time with this massive spike in listeners, like on that day in that sort of 28 to 48 hour period. So if I said to someone, hey, you want to promote your podcast, what's the best way? I'd be like, get natural comments and recommendations of people on Twitter and LinkedIn. But that's obviously hard to get. So like what an agency would say instead would be like, oh, let's put you some ads on radio, let's put some ads here or ads there, and that's the playbook. Over to you. What do you think?
I think that there is an element of partnerships, and partners with the people that make sense, right? So like, for example, I do a monthly market recap recording with the Martech podcast. And part of that is mutual respect for our content. It's like, hey, we work nice together. So you can always partner with people in very light touch ways. Events are a really good way to drive exposure, particularly for like, if you have a certain angle on something and you attract people that are similar, you can actually leverage those relationships to partnerships and speaking gigs and all these other sort of content. For example, I put out a LinkedIn post a couple of weeks ago, and I said, hey, I want to do a talk on this topic, which is you're too busy and everyone's exhausted. What technology did to marketing? And then I had 5 people reach out. Okay, cool. I'm going to speak over in Canada or speak in New York next year on this topic, right? And one's going to be a keynote, one's going to be a webinar. All right, great. And then there's a few other that are getting developed. But that's just through like partnering with people, collaborating, accessing their audiences, accessing their influence. You give their influence as well. It's a sort of organic trade. And it's a really interesting concept because and the founder of Work Week actually did a great newsletter recently, just 2 weeks ago, on the recapping the Work Week as a platform. It's a newsletter platform, basically. And he said that, there's 2 types of capital, right? There's the economic capital, like where you're buying ads or stuff. But then there's the cultural capital, right? Which media companies are rich in cultural capital, and usually technology companies are very poor in cultural capital, but they're very economically viable, right? So you look at those 2 things, and over a while, you start gravitating towards people that have similar views or have similar. They're trying to say sort of change industry in similar ways, and so you partner with those people and you access their audiences. That's a really interesting one because you get those affinities. But yeah, I think in terms of just content bumps, I mean, sometimes it just comes out of random places, man. Like I've been totally just surprised. I did when was it? It was maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, where I did I wasn't feeling comfortable about releasing it, but I did a piece on, it was called Headless Everything, which is the whole idea of like, that Martech tools are increasingly becoming headless and just plugging onto existing databases and data warehouses. And there's so much I wanted to talk about in that, and I didn't get the time, and I put it out anyway. It ended up going, really, really well. Like a lot of people shared it, internal Slack groups, got a ton of messages, great feedback. A bunch of people reached out, want to talk to me. And that was just, sometimes you just don't know. I mean, sometimes you just don't know. It's like Ed Sheeran, right? Like Ed Sheeran's concept is with writing music, one of the most popular, pop stars out in the world, and folk singers. He would just calls it the water through the pipe theory. Like he's got thousands and thousands of songs he's never released, but they're junk. They're not good, but he just keeps going, right? Just water through the pipe, and then eventually he gets to some good stuff.
That's
right?
that IDEO, that famous IDEO, the design program that's quite big and affiliated with Apple founders and that kind of thing. They did that very famous research piece on pottery. I think it was a scientific test on pottery classes, and they gave one group, they split into 2 cohorts. One group was instructed to create a really great piece of pottery and concentrate on just creating the best piece ever, and then they gave the other one, and they said your objective is output, so I want the most pieces that are like half decent that you can do in this time period. And the second group actually produced the better pieces, not the first one. So it's kind of like there is method in the volume game, because if you don't put yourself, like, it's kind of your blast radius. If you don't put yourself out there, you won't have the chance of something actually taking off. And it's the same with me with episodes. I'm like, some of them kind of do well, some of them just take off, and I'm like, wow, I thought that was really boring, but everyone liked it. Okay, cool, whatever. I'm wrong again, you know what I mean? So
yeah, but the whole question of like, does taking off even really matter?
Exactly.
I mean, if that's your goal, then go and dance on TikTok. Like seriously.
Yeah, I know. Like I've sort of gone, these are the areas of strategy I'm really interested in and want to learn more about. And then I've gone, this is the people that I think could be cool to, talk about those things. And, some of them I've known, some I've reached out to, most of them I've reached out to as their first time ever on a podcast, which is kind of funny. And you get this really raw, interesting insight that nobody else is talking about. So that's kind of why I did mine. And then I sort of just going through all the different areas to help people make better decisions about, in their role, whether I should invest in this, and if I do, what are the things I should stay away from so it doesn't fail? And is there a bit of a checklist? So blending that sort of strategy piece to the tactical execution piece, which is what nobody does. Like coming back to the academic people, it's very top level but then everyone goes, okay, that sounds all good. Yeah, awesome. And then they get to do that actual thing. They go, oh, what do I do? Do you have a template? How do you actually do this? Where do I start? You know, so I'm trying to fill that piece in. But anyway.
Yeah, well, that's it. Like you've got a genuine interest in solving that problem for real people, right? That need that help. And that's my view is that like, if you stay the course, you've got a genuine problem you want to solve. You genuinely are enjoying doing it. And you get that volume going. I mean, it's very hard to fail over a long time horizon. It's very hard to fail. Like you do that over 3 years. Like for me personally, the Martech Weekly was my first content project. The only entrepreneurial thing I did before then was when I was in hospitality and I started a catering company. Very different, right? It was a small potatoes catering business, but this is my first media company startup that I've run. And you know what? The work has become sweeter and more joyful and more enjoyable, right? And I feel like it's more purposeful as I go, as more people give me good feedback. But you know what? You stick to a long enough time horizon, right? You stick to a 10-year time horizon. And you know what? It'll be very hard for almost any other media company to sort of compete with you over that time horizon, because you build authority, influence, trust, you build all of these great things, you build virality. All of those things come in time. I mean, like you got to answer the question first, like, what are you influencing people to do? If you don't know what that is, then go back, don't start something, right? Like I've spoke to so many people who they just like, they flame out after like a couple of weeks. They do some epic essays and some of it's pretty good, but they flame out because they really don't know what they want to do. Like they want to make money. They want to be influential, but that stuff is not going to stay the course for you. I'm just sorry. Like I said before, like if you want to be viral, then go dance on TikTok for people or, you know, get nude, right? Because I mean, it's just like, that's what people are attracted to, right? The people like it's whole argument of like, you see a car accident on the other side of the highway and the whole highway that's going the other direction is slowing down. Why are they slowing down? Because they're all taking a look, right? If you want to do outrageous stuff, if you want to be like Logan Paul or Mr. Beast, right? Or they're just doing stupid, like bottom of the barrel stuff and they're just getting attention. Great. If you actually want to move or change an industry or influence people for something better, then stay the course. Then, you know, commit to a craft and just go for it and stay on the course and stay in it. It will get better. Like often it does, right? And often I really look back when I only had, say, 100 subscribers at TMW, and I remember, wow, I experimented so much back then because nobody cared. And it was so freeing, you know, like as a time you care more, but keeping that kernel of actually, it's what's true back then is true today. It's just a bigger audience. That's all, you know. So that's my view, is that it's you know, those are sort of my view and on perhaps changing some of the paradigms here around content. Hopefully it helps somebody.
Yeah, so in an era of impatience, there's currency in value in patience and staying the course.
Patience is a moat. It's a moat. It's seriously, it's a defensive moat. Yeah, just staying the course. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Juan. I really like it. Yeah, I love what you're doing over there at Martech Weekly and all your other projects. So keep on going, and thanks for divulging some of your insider information to the world of content. Haven't been there, done that to the listeners. So appreciate your time.
No, great. No, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm a big fan of Champagne Strategy. I definitely recommend. Stay the course, please, John. Please stay the course. It's
awesome. Been 2 years. If I was going to quit, I'd be quitting already, to be honest. Yeah, but anyway, thanks.
Well, you've got a pandemic baby, and it's almost a toddler. So well done.